Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review for you all. This movie is a horror film from Uruguay and Argentina, joint venture, Spanish language, English subs, released in the year 2020, directed by Maximiliano Contenti, and this film is called The Last Matinee. It's also known as Red Screening, so if you can't find it under one title, please look for it under the other. So the story of The Last Matinee, it's set in the city on a very rainy day, and there is a cinema that is playing this horror film. Now, the daughter of the owner of this cinema is standing in for him because he's ill, and so she's going to be the projectionist while she studies, and the people that are coming into the cinema to watch this horror film are in for a surprise, because not only are they going to get a gory horror movie, but they're going to have a gory experience because there's a serial killer amongst them. He seek refuge inside this cinema to get out of the rain, and now he's picking off these viewers one by one, and so the projectionist, once she finds out what's going on, is up to her to save the day. So whether or not she can, something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Last Matinee, aka Red Screening. I really wanted this movie to be good. It's because I love South American horror films. They're just very unique, and there have been some pretty good ones, but the reason why I'm always skeptical coming into a South American horror film is that they are definitely hit and miss. It's Russian roulette. 1 in every 6 is very good, but you have to go through a lot of rubbish to get to that gold. And I was hoping that The Last Matinee would be that gold. And so, not knowing exactly what I was going to get, the curiosity was there, and wanting to support South American cinema, I'm always excited to see another horror film from this region of the world. And after watching The Last Matinee, I will say that I was actually disappointed. And that's not saying it's a waste of time, because there's a lot to like about this movie, but I felt as though if it tweaked itself here and there, it could have been a really good horror film. Now, if you're into retro slashers, then this is a movie for you. If you're into giallos, this is a movie for you, because it's clearly taken inspiration from those movies. So I thought the cinematography was actually quite decent. It had that 80s sort of feel. I thought the music was very giallo-like, and so if you like that sort of thing, it's definitely for you. So it's really a homage and a love letter to those previous movies that it's clearly inspired by, so Dario Argento and Lucio Fulci as far as the gore is concerned. So it definitely has a lot of likeable qualities. I thought as though the gore effects were really well done. Some of the kills were actually quite inventive, and I really liked the killer. The killer had a really morbid way about him, and so this is the ingredients for a really good slasher. And so when you see all these people horribly dispatched, I thought, alright, well, this is definitely taking me in a nostalgic way, basically a trip down memory lane, where I was watching Friday the 13th, where you're not necessarily based in realism, but it's just a caricature experience in violence. And so this is definitely what The Last Matinee understands. I felt like Maximiliano Contenti was a fan of these movies, and so if you are into that sort of thing, you'll appreciate how this movie looks. And so a lot of the creativity is there. I thought the cinema, it was a very good setting. It was a different sort of setting, and I thought as though it worked fairly well. I thought the killer had a lot of menace about him, and so the suspense levels were there. But unfortunately, the reason why I was so disappointed with this movie is that the build-up just goes nowhere. It's about 40 minutes before the good things start to happen, and the characters are just not interesting at all, and they just mumble through. There are conversations that I thought absolutely went nowhere, and the movie was just static for 40 minutes. It was just waiting for something. It was never building for anything. I thought as though the character development was non-existent, so what was the 40 minutes used for? And the 40 minutes is obviously used to actually make this a feature-length film, because there's no other reason as to why this existed, because the conversations were just small talk, and so I never really got an insight into these characters. And when they started to get killed, it was basically, I didn't know them any better, and so they were cannon fodder, but the movie is trying to give you an insight into this cannon fodder, but it's a slasher film, it's a retro slasher film, and they don't really go into character development. And so this movie, because you don't care about these characters, because you're waiting for the serial killer to inflict his misery upon these people, the wait is just way too long. And so I thought as though it was incredibly tedious, it was very boring, and it started to get really frustrating. But when the good things started to happen, they were actually really impressive. But unfortunately, it's that first 40 minutes that's an absolute chore to get through, and it's the reason why I wouldn't watch this movie in its entirety again. I will watch maybe some of the kills because they're really well done, but unfortunately the kills and a really good killer don't make an overall experience. An overall experience is really utilising each and every minute, but I felt as though half of this movie was wasted. Half the movie was waiting to develop into something that it didn't really know how to, and it just becomes just going around in circles, treading familiar territory and never really elevating. So you're constantly asking yourself, why did that 40 minutes exist? These people are getting killed, and the first 40 minutes, as I said, is that character sort of interactions with each other, but because it's such small talk, I just felt as though I didn't care. And so I was looking at my my watch, waiting for the good stuff to happen. Thankfully, when the good stuff happens, it does save it to some degree, because it is good to look at. But overall, I just thought as though it could have been a really good horror film if it had a little bit more interest into the characters and maybe making them three-dimensional entities, as opposed to just going around in circles and just waiting for the good stuff to happen. So I felt as though there's a lot of filler in this movie, but when it does start to kick into gear, it is worth it. So if you're into retro horror films that are well made, then I would definitely go and check this one out. It's clear that some money has been put behind it, so that was a good thing to see. That money is still going into these horror films, but unfortunately, although it is a love letter to those classic horror films, it just has a lot of unnecessary element in this movie that just makes it a little bit disappointing. So if it was a little bit shorter, it could have been a really, really good film, but unfortunately it just feels as though there's a lot of filler that just doesn't go anywhere. So overall, for the last matinee, aka Red screening, going to give this one 2.5 stars, because the second half of the movie is actually pretty good, and unfortunately the first half really lets it down. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.